What if I told you a government you trust conducted a medical experiment on its own citizens, without their informed consent, and allowed them to suffer from a curable disease? Welcome to a dark chapter in medical history, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service, in collaboration with the Tuskegee Institute, initiated an experiment to study the progression of untreated syphilis in African American men in Macon County, Alabama. The study was initially intended to last 6 months, but it shockingly extended to 40 long years. Welcome to Top Things. Today, we uncover a harrowing chapter in medical history with Unveiled Truths, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study Exposed. Journey with us as we delve into the depths of a 40-year-long unethical experiment conducted under the guise of scientific advancement. Through the stories of the men involved, the deceitful practices of researchers, and the eventual public outcry, we explore the profound implications on trust, ethics, and the need for vigilant oversight in medical research. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study Exposed. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study stands as one of the most egregious examples of unethical human experimentation carried out by a U.S. governmental public health organization. Through records and first-hand accounts, a 40-year program purportedly studying the effects of untreated syphilis has been revealed as an endeavor that intentionally deceived, manipulated, and deprived vulnerable test subjects of available treatments for a debilitating disease. By modern standards, the program's methods represent grave violations of ethical constraints regarding consent, deceit, and reckless disregard for human well-being. While certain historical and societal contexts may explain the emergence of this profoundly misguided research, they do not excuse its affront to individual dignity and agency. And the Tuskegee Study's legacy still rightfully impacts minority communities' trust in public health systems given past betrayals. Through constructive unearthing of factual details around the program's operations, oversight failures, and eventual disclosure, though, we can strengthen modern safeguards while honoring victims by fostering dialogue on past wrongs as an impetus for positive change. The balance of this video will analyze the Tuskegee study through an expository lens anchored in established evidence derived from government reports, historical investigations, witness accounts, and academic research. By illuminating the story factually without hyperbole, the aim is not to rebuke but to educate on a distressing history still partly obscured by lingering unknowns and disputable interpretations. Responsible examination promotes understanding and moral discussion as the first necessary steps before reconciliation or reform emerges. Program, inception, and scope. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service, PHS, commenced a study of untreated syphilis in Macon County, Alabama, involving 600 African American men, 399 with syphilis, and a control group of 201 without the disease. The PHS collaborated with Tuskegee Institute, a historically black college, to leverage its pre-existing medical programs and credibility within the target test community. Researchers never disclosed to subjects that they had syphilis, instead promising free medical care for what they called bad blood, a colloquialism for various ailments. Initial intentions remain unclear given significant record gaps, but later statements claimed scientific interest in assessing efficacy of standard treatments through postmortems by tracking the disease's debilitating progression without intervention. However, even then, prevailing medical consensus deemed the approach dangerously flawed, since proven remedies existed rendering willful non-intervention reckless, and no verified evidence shows subjects provided informed consent to being studied rather than gratuitously treated. Regardless of stated rationales, withholding known cures from afflicted participants as core methodology was where the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male would breach timeless bioethical standards. By 1947, penicillin emerged as a highly effective syphilis remedy, rendering the study increasingly unjustifiable as participants died or experienced severe complications from advancing infections deliberately left unchecked. Yet the PHS continued, rationalizing that test subjects receiving end-of-life care at Tuskegee Institute's medical facilities constituted sufficient ethical grounding to prolong observations. Even after public health mandates to universally treat syphilis cases, researchers took steps to ensure subjects did not independently obtain penicillin, allegedly even leveraging relationships with local health providers. There, the myth of palliative-focused therapy crucially obscured the denial of proven remedies now deemed standard of care. 600 poor, illiterate men were enrolled in the study. Among them, 399 had latent syphilis, while the remaining 201 were without the disease, serving as a control group. Misled into believing they were receiving treatment for bad blood, a colloquial term encompassing several ailments, these men received no effective therapy for their condition. The men were offered free medical examinations, meals, and burial insurance as incentives to participate in the study. However, they were left clueless about their diagnosis or the actual purpose of the study. In fact, even when penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis in 1947, the men were not offered the treatment. Instead, the researchers watched as the disease progressed, documenting its devastating effects. Deception and manipulation. In addition to the foundational violation of withholding available treatments, the Tuskegee study relied profoundly on deception regarding subjects' diagnoses and the program's operational objectives. Recruited under presumption of receiving healthcare, the absence of informed consent meant trusting participants remained unaware they had contracted syphilis, or that researchers were intentionally tracking its untreated progression rather than delivering services. PHS officials capitalized on broader socioeconomic vulnerabilities of poor, mostly illiterate subjects in rural Alabama, unable to access medical information other patient groups took for granted even at the time. Throughout its 40-year span, the study continually relied on misleading participants to believe they were receiving gratuitous care rather than serving as test subjects. Beyond never disclosing initial diagnosis, medical personnel systematically reinterpreted symptoms, including the profoundly visible ones associated with late-stage syphilis, as unrelated ailments. Subjects would undergo spinal taps purportedly to evaluate stomach issues when actually testing for syphilis markers. This campaign of deception around diagnoses and intentions spanned decades, enabled by subjects' marginalization. The PHS also worked actively to prevent outside groups, including state health departments, from inadvertently providing treatment under mandated reporting and partner notification practices for communicable diseases. Staff tracked subjects across counties and obscured records to avoid risk of detection and treatment that could undermine observational data integrity. Some doctors outside the study reportedly even matched fatalities to incomplete case summaries in academic journals as clues affirming probable cause they were barred from disclosing to living patients or kin. The pursuit of scientific data rationalized secrecy, suppression of established public health practices, and repetition of failed oversight well beyond any ethical expiry. The study was not without its critics. A few public health administrators questioned the morality of the experiment, but their concerns were largely ignored. The study continued until 1972, when a whistleblower exposed the experiment to the media, causing an uproar that finally led to its termination. Whistleblowing and public disclosure. In 1966, Peter Buxton, a PHS venereal disease investigator in San Francisco, discovered internal documents detailing the trajectory of the Tuskegee study. Alarmed in recognizing deliberate withholding of known cures, Buxton filed an official protest through the agency's formal channels. After years without substantive response beyond hollow internal reviews, he leaked the story to an Associated Press reporter in 1972, sparking the first wave of public scrutiny. Subsequent outcries centered on unethical deception regarding available treatments and diagnosis that violated basic standards of consent. Once revealed, some study architects still initially defended continuation by claiming subjects now dying of advanced syphilis no longer stood to clinically benefit from treatments focusing solely on palliation. Intentional intervention remained unjustifiable given both lack of efficacy and presumed research consent at this late stage. Persisting belief in the positive scientific value of a fundamentally unethical program highlighted stubborn institutional deficiencies that enabled such moral compromises internally for decades. It was not until July 26, 1972, 40 years after the program began, that the PHS finally terminated the Tuskegee study, due in large part to mounting negative publicity rather than internally driven ethics concerns. 4 days later, a U.S. Department of Health, Education and Welfare (HEW) investigation released findings of ethically unjustified failures by claiming the longer the study is continued, the more scientifically unsound and therefore unethical are the initial suppositions on which the study is premised. The judgment, while validating whistleblower accusations, relied still on utilitarian logic of research soundness rather than morality to force closure. In 1973, congressional subcommittee hearings reviewed the HEW conclusions, with members expressing outrage regarding the ethical breaches and echoing rising public condemnation over such government-sponsored deception at the expense of marginalized citizens. However, beyond the study's end, lasting impacts of untreated syphilis over 4 decades left many victims profoundly disabled or terminally ill, and the PHS made no effort at remediation for survivors unable to return to normal lives, given decades of deliberate medical neglect, cover-ups, and broken trust. Lasting impacts and assessments. In the aftermath, outrage mounted over how an unethical, scientifically invalid program lasted 40 years under federal government auspices with only nominal internal scrutiny. Both inherited trust in institutions and prevailing socio-medical views of certain groups seemingly excused ethics lapses since raised voices either didn't or couldn't penetrate insular systems promoting internal interests over accountability. The cost in lives ruined and trust betrayed sparked grassroots activists and politicians alike to demand profound reforms, both legislative and cultural. Class action lawsuits led to a $10 million out-of-court settlement for victims and families in 1974, after evidence confirmed researchers intentionally deprived subjects of decades of proper diagnosis and access to treatments. While financial compensation assisted survivors, it could not redress shortened lifespans, preventable suffering, stigmatization of entire communities, and the delivery of sham healthcare that shattered fundamental patient rights and dignity. The program's legacy would linger through intergenerational impacts in ways financial alone damages cannot reconcile. In tandem with financial reparations, the Tuskegee study led directly to codified modern bioethics protections, like mandatory informed consent. And its disclosure sparked creation of institutional review boards, IRBs, designed specifically to evaluate ethics independently from experimental soundness. These developments proved monumental in transitioning oversight away from speculative utilitarianism towards frameworks securing individual rights against government imposition regardless of stated rationale. The once unimaginable harms inflicted through deception were fundamental to catalyzing more foundational checks protecting vulnerable populations. The Tuskegee syphilis study was a shocking violation of ethical standards. It led to significant changes in how clinical trials are conducted. Informed consent, communication of diagnosis, and accurate reporting of test results are now mandatory in all medical studies. But the damage was done. The study's legacy left an indelible mark on the African American community, fostering a deep mistrust towards the medical establishment that persists even today. To summarize, the Tuskegee syphilis study was a 40-year-long medical experiment conducted on African American men without their informed consent. The men were left untreated for syphilis, even when a cure became available. The study was exposed in 1972 and led to significant changes in the conduct of clinical trials. This dark chapter in medical history serves as a stark reminder of the importance of ethics in scientific research. It underscores the need for transparency, informed consent, and respect for the dignity and rights of all participants in medical studies. It's a lesson we must never forget. Conclusion: the Tuskegee syphilis study, while far from the only unethical government-backed experiment with marginalized communities, remains among the most impactful given its unprecedented duration and profound deceit which shattered lives, trust, and notions of health systems as sanctuaries from imposition. Its legacy is one of both deep tragedy and foundational reform, as disclosure ultimately triggered modern bioethics constraints against repetition. In assessing such distressing histories, the reflex towards outrage or definitive assignment of institutional blame risks reactionary judgments over nuanced understanding. Yes, the harms verified through later investigations highlight indefensible ethical breaches both at program inception and in perplexing perpetuation. But broader cultures tolerating such practices demand honest reckoning as well. Integrating difficult truths into collective memory can strengthen society's moral fabric against future violations, both overt and those seated in gradual rationalization of incremental harms against the unseen. While words alone cannot undo damage from callous exploitation of trust and authority at scale, they can affirm past wrongs to accelerate social progress. The unfinished legacy of Tuskegee is one of overdue transparency, unrealized reconciliation through open airing of truth, and responsibilities emerging from rights hard fought through others' suffering. In constructive dialogue around painful histories, we forge beginnings of the more perfect social covenant that troubled past demand, but which future generations deserve. Final thoughts. The Tuskegee syphilis study not only reveals the depths of ethical malpractice, but also serves as a critical lesson in the importance of consent, transparency, and accountability in medical research. How can we ensure that the lessons from the Tuskegee experiment are effectively integrated into current medical ethics, education, and practice? In what ways can public health systems rebuild trust with communities historically subjected to medical exploitation and discrimination? As we conclude our exploration of the Tuskegee syphilis study, it's clear that the scars left by this dark chapter extend beyond the individuals directly affected, challenging us to confront uncomfortable truths about institutional betrayal and the importance of ethical integrity in all scientific endeavors. If this video has moved you, sparked questions, or inspired thoughts on how we can learn from the past to better shape the future of medical ethics, share your reflections below. Remember, understanding our history is the first step towards ensuring such injustices never happen again. Like, share, and subscribe for more insightful content on the lessons from history we must not forget. Thank you for watching Top Thangs.